Hi, y'all. I'm Joe, your host and Cannabis Lifestyle Guide. Thank you to Jeff Gray and Josh Wurzer, two of the co founders of SC Labs, for joining us today. They are going to talk to us about the science of cannabis judging. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for
having
having
us.
Certainly. One of the biggest buzzes in the California cannabis space right now is the fact that we are about to have the very first state sanctioned, supported cannabis judging. And up until now, this has been like this kind of cult classic following where we go to these different competitions and a bunch of OGs have gotten together and assessed a bunch of cannabis that's come in and has been entered. And y'all are shaking things up and doing it a little bit different. So I guess y'all would probably be best to tell me how and the best place to dive in about, why did the state decide to do take a scientific approach to cannabis judging versus kind of the old school classic way that we're used to? Where do you
Yeah,
start?
go for it, Jeff.
Well, first, I'm really excited. I mean, we aren't imagine that the criteria for judging, is been approached in a bunch of different fashions. And while is the lab, we're there in support of however the state decided to construct the test. So, I think I think there's definitely an incredible amount of merit to put your hands on it. You know, uh, uh, taste, smell, right? That regular kind of evaluation process that everybody does. But I think what's interesting about this, and maybe it's a bit of a swing of the pendulum, kind of quite a bit the other way. But I think what's interesting about this is the opportunity to really have people present to people a way of evaluating cannabis on quality metrics based on based on measurable scientific attributes. I mean, almost very similar in my mind to just product criteria that you would find for almost anything, right? And I think that coupled with that sensory experience is really where you end up with the greatest amount of information. What was most interesting to me is that that I'm we're we've been in the cannabis testing industry for 12 years. I've been in the cannabis industry in California for 25 plus years, and in that time it's changed so much. I mean, it used to be that the process of evaluating cannabis in a dispensary was somebody would open the jar, somebody would bring something into a buyer at a dispensary and they'd open a bag and really do a deep evaluation of something, and the buyer was this like person with this amazing background and blah blah blah. And what's happening now is regulations have dictated that as a consumer you're going to walk into that store and you're never going to smell anything. You're not going to put your hands on it. You're not going to put it to your nose. You're not going to evaluate it like that. So, what information do you actually have at your disposal to make choices? And how do you make choices or get similar information other than kind of a funny strain name that may or may not actually be representative of what it was, or some way that the bud tender characterizes it for you? And I think that's why to me it's exciting that the scientific data is being presented as an additional right set of product information. I mean, I'm from California, so to me, it just blows my mind that the state is now putting this on, and I appreciate that very much in the same way the state is presenting, you know, is a best in class in terms of wines, and is a best in class in terms of cheese and agricultural products. California is a best in class in terms of cannabis, and always has been. And I'm a little biased, obviously, but will continue to be. So that's exciting. I think their choice to focus solely on just the scientific information on the chemometric data has a lot to do with the logistics of putting their hands on cannabis. To be honest, I think
That's kind of what
setting up,
I thought too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I'm like, it's great, but I feel like they're like, yeah, we need to keep a safe distance. So let's just keep it all science. But I like that because now it's giving the Gen Pop, the mainstream, an opportunity to understand how a connoisseur is kind of looking at cannabis anyway. We're teaching them new language. They're going to get new vocabulary that they haven't had before. So that part I think is really exciting. Josh, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the way that this event is being judged, and it is, there's definitely some pros and some cons to sort of a more of a chemometric based judging process. For instance, when we're and I've been judges in various cannabis cups. I've been a judge for the Emerald Cup, and so with more of a human judging experience, all the samples need to be submitted right around the same time, so they're the same level of freshness, and so they can all be evaluated concurrently by the judges. By making the contest more chemometric based, it allows producers to submit samples over a much wider window of time, and so that allows for different harvests to all sort of get judged on the same level, and kind of carrying that theme forward. Um, a chemometric based judging system is kind of eliminates any of the human biases that might be there, whether it's recency bias, or whether I'm a judge and I prefer a certain kind of flavor profile in my cannabis, and so now I'm going to have kind of these intrinsic bias to kind of certain flavors and certain effects. Whereas when you kind of with the chemometric system, it takes those biases out of the equation, and sort of kind of everything's judged basically on its physical attributes. I agree 100% with Jeff that both are very important, and I think equally valued. And I think you see a lot of the cups that were solely organoleptically judged, or judged by humans, are starting to actually incorporate a lot of the testing data. And I think somewhere along the line, we'll sort of see a merging of the two styles. But it's been really, like Jeff said, it's been really exciting for us putting together a system that sort of is able to first sort strains, and sort entries into buckets, sort of based on their flavor profiles, not based on their strain name, not based on indica sativa, but based on their actual chemical flavor profiles. And then within each of those buckets, we're able to take sort of the overall magnitude of terpenes and cannabinoids, and depending on the category, put a score to that sample by based on its actual physical and chemical attributes, rather than sort of the kind of the traditional way. So it's been fun for us. It's definitely something new that we've done. We've never done this level of sort of kind of grading in a contest before, and so it's been a really neat exercise, and we're really excited kind of for people to see how it all turned out.
Now I'm
Turned out.
curious because, there's always the indoor versus sun grown. And in most cannabis cups, they're different categories. So now that everything is being judged on, by these scientific metrics, are all of these different, you know, flowers going to be judged together? So we'll actually get to see, like, does outdoor have a more robust terpene profile? Is indoor, are they still going to be separate categories?
So there's still separate categories. So there still will be an indoor, mixed light, and outdoor um, award for each of the different category types. But what we'll be able to do, very easily, is compare that data. And so, while each of those categories will be awarded separately, which makes sense because we do see some differences in, for instance, terpene profiles. Not as much cannabinoid profiles, but definitely terpene profiles from sun grown in indoor cannabis. And not necessarily indicating that one is better than the other, but different. And so it makes sense to sort of judge them on their merits against each other. But what'll be really fun after this contest is going back and sort of analyzing that data. And I think the competition will be able to generate a lot of really interesting data out of this contest. And I think over the years, it'll be interesting to see how these chemometrics kind of evolve over time, as the years go by. So it's not, they'll be judged separately, but certainly we'll be able to compare them across each other, and I think that'll be a lot of fun.
I think that will be a lot of fun too. So, the old school classification that really just needs to die, the indica sativa hybrid thing. I also feel like this is going to be a great way to kind of put that to bed. How would you describe kind of how this old classification is irrelevant, and what are y'all seeing as, like you said, you've been a testing lab for 12 years, and you probably see some commonalities in things, and kind of the dominant terpenes and those sorts of things. So kind of talk about the letting go of the old and moving into the new.
Well, I'll say to your point earlier. I mean, what's amazing about this is I think we've been doing the cannabis cup since, wow, 11 years. I think the very first thing we did was an Emerald Cup in 2010. So, we've seen a lot of these over time, and I think there's what's unique about this, and there's a number of things that are unique about this particular cup. But I think and what's really exciting is the idea that you're going to be introducing cannabis holistically to a net new audience in a way that we haven't done before, and that's really exciting, right? I mean, we're also, believers in the plant, the value of the plant, what it can contribute. And it's amazing to be able to frame for people for their first time seeing cannabis in a comprehensive manner, really how to understand it, how to speak about it, and how to organize their thoughts around different chemovars and all that. The indica sativa, indica sativa, what's interesting is it's so limited because you're really describing, morphological traits of the plant, which can or cannot be in some instances correlated to chemical profiles, but it's no more than corollary at best. So the interesting thing is it's not even actually how we've always, like, when I was a kid and was learning about cannabis, even used the terms. The way that we are using the terms is really about the effect, not about the description of the plant at all. And so it was always that, indica having that couch like effect and sativa having that uplifting effect, and those are, you're really describing, you're really describing chemometric traits, if you will, right? The inevitable outcome of the, chemical interplay, all the different entourage effects with the, um, with terpenes and the cannabinoids and the minor cannabinoids, right? That sort of, you know, holistic experience is what you're describing, and those terms. I mean, to your question, how are they limited? They don't describe them at all, right? I mean, they're misnomers. I'm not really sure. It's like once we committed, we could never get away. We can never get away from using them as descriptions, right?
Yeah, it's like getting a bad nickname as a kid that you can't run away from.
But
Yeah.
but what is real is are the effects that Jeff is describing, and what we can do with kind of with measuring the actual levels of some of these different bioactive ingredients in cannabis, is we can sort of map those effects to other chemicals that are in cannabis, whether they're cannabinoids or whether there's some of these terpenes that are known to have different bioactive properties. For instance, myrcene is known to be a sedative. Plenty of research out there with myrcene, in isolation, that suggests it's a relatively strong natural sedative. And lo and behold, when you look at most of the strains out there that are labeled indica in shops, when you run a chemical analysis on them, you find that they have a lot of myrcene in them. And then the ones that are traditionally labeled sativa have little to no myrcene. So they're the labels sort of, they arose before we had any type of chemical analysis, and people were trying to kind of put some sort of, put things in buckets and describe them, because, the cool thing about cannabis is it has such a wide range of effects and flavors. And that part isn't, that part is still is valid. It's just, what is actually causing that in this indica and sativa classification doesn't describe what we're actually experiencing.
Well, and that's the thing that I hear from a newbie is, well, I want a sativa. So point me to a sativa. I don't want to, be in the couch. I want to go out and do something. And so for me as an educator and a lifestyle guide, it's doing a lot of, rolling things back and starting over and educating, like, terpenes. They're the essential oils of plants, and they have, these different effects. And so, I think that having something like this at a state fair where everybody is there, it's just a great opportunity to educate people on just this new world of cannabis. And, some of the things like the words cannabinoid and terpenoid and flavonoids, it sounds so sciencey that people just kind of shut off, and they're like, that's complicated, and that's over my head. Just hand me what I should smoke or, eat or whatever. So, how do you, in layman's terms, describe, the role of the cannabinoids and terpenes so that people can understand and feel good about what they're learning?
Okay, yeah, and so in this kind of gets right into how we're going to be, judging the state fair, or how the algorithm is set up to sort of judge the state fair. So like I said, the first step in what we see in the laboratory is that, even though cannabis does have the ability to produce dozens of cannabinoids and even more terpenes, and actually the cannabinoids themselves, like THC and CBD, are just specialized forms of terpenes, that are produced solely by the cannabis plant. So they're all similar in a similar sort of family of chemical compounds produced by the plants. And so what we do see, though, is of all the cannabis that's out in the market, there's really only a handful of sort of dominant terpene profiles. And by dominant terpene profiles, I mean profiles sort of grouped by the terpenes that are there in the highest concentration. And like I said, myrcene is a very common cannabinoid to be found in terpenes, or to be found in cannabis, terpene to be found in cannabis. And what we see is that there's a big chunk of the strains out in the market that are dominant in myrcene, have a lot of myrcene, maybe twice as much as the next highest concentration terpene, and then kind of maybe some of the other terpenes in different combinations. Then we also see that myrcene will show up at times in almost equal amounts with some of the other terpenes, whether it be beta caryophyllene or limonene. And then beta caryophyllene and limonene are also common terpenes. Then we also see pinene, oftentimes is sort of the highest concentration terpene in cannabis, and in a lot of those strains, there's very little myrcene. So, and then we also beyond that we see all osamine, terpinolene, and that's about it as far as dominant terpenes. So what we see is similar to wine. There you go, right there. So similar to wine, there's sort of a red and a white, with in sort of major classifications, and for us that would be the dominant terpene classes. And for us, there's 4 or 5 of those, and that's what we see kind of cannabis just naturally group into. Then beyond that, the other terpenes that are there sort of fill out that effect. So for instance, with the co-dominant classes, you have everything from desserts to fuels to to kind of some of the floral strains, but all still have similar dominant terpene profiles. But it's those kind of next level of terpenes that dictate kind of the more nuances in flavor and smell. So when we're looking at it, we're looking at it sort of similar to kind of what you would see with kind of by classifying things into indica, sativa, and hybrid. It's just much more nuanced than that, and that's how the competition will be set up as well. So the competition will be set up as like we talked about, indoor, outdoor, and then mixed light. And then within that, there will be categories. The different entries will be categorized based on their dominant terpene profile. So there'll be a myrcene category, there'll be a pinene category, there'll be a caryophyllene or beta caryophyllene category, there'll be an osamine category, a terpinolene category, and a limonene category. And so those are sort of all of the possible dominant terpenes to be found in cannabis. Then there will also be one more category sort of for the co-dominant strains. So these are strains or varieties that are rich in either limonene, myrcene, or beta caryophyllene in relatively equal amounts. And then beyond that, we'll also have special categories for both, the highest testing THC strain and the highest testing CBD strain as well. But as you can see, there's kind of the categories are mostly focused on sort of terpenes, which gives us our flavor profile, sort of kind of the nuances and effect and all of that.
I think one of the pieces that will be important that comes out around this is the fact that, the highest THC percentage isn't necessarily the winner. Like, we are showing people that there's, a lot more going on under the hood that we should be, looking at, inspecting, and appreciating. One of the things that I find really interesting, the way, you've pulled out like these six dominant terpenes, is being able to see, okay, which strains kind of fall in these categories. And then that way you find, if you have like, I really like fruity strains. And so if I like this, then, oh, wow, I'm going to love these 5, 6, 10 other strains. It kind of makes it easier to, choose and venture out from something you like when you kind of get an idea of how to judge it based on, the smell, knowing that these effects are attached to this smell.
Yeah, I mean, to your point earlier, how do you present this to somebody in layman's terms such that it just doesn't go over their head?
Yeah.
It's actually really
Because I mean,
difficult to
Josh,
do.
it did kinda go over that. But
Well,
that's what I
yeah.
love about you. You're a scientist, okay?
Well, I think there's just a kind of a translation, right? I mean, when somebody comes to you and says, "I'm looking for that indica effect," and not that sort of couch lock indica feeling, I think you speak to people where they're at. They're asking you for something. They may not be saying it correctly, and I think it's easy to give them some very basic terms and a very basic way to understand this. They don't have to be able to break out, limonene and beta caryophyllene ratio and a dessert strain. I mean, they could get there. What's interesting though is it speaks to, again, speaking to people where they're at. There are people who've never done this before, and I think just framing for them, if you go into a dispensary and you use indica and sativa as a guide, you're really not going to end up in the place that you want or the medicine that you want. Same thing is true with just using THC as the one number above all other numbers to determine the quality of your cannabis. That too is misleading. But then again, there are those of us who've been in the industry or just have been, you know, cannabis enthusiasts or what have you for a long time. And for those people, they'll understand when you say dessert strains meet a particular profile, even if they don't understand the terpenes. If you lay it out for them, they'll understand like versus like. And I think for most of us, when we're making choices, we just want to know, like, hey, I tried this, I like it. How do I get something where I get a similar effect or a similar taste and flavor? And I think that's how you really simplify this. There's a ways to go. But what's beautiful is cannabis is an incredibly complicated and like bountiful offering, right? It's so complex in these profiles. And it doesn't do us any good to dumb them down. So, again, it's important to speak to people where they're at, but the education has to build.
Yeah. So, the benefits to consumers from this testing, because that's really ultimately where I feel like we need to go, because there's a lot of problems in the California cannabis industry, and the people with the most power are the ones spending the money. And if we are sending them into dispensaries, or they're buying on the black market because they don't want to pay the ridiculous taxes, you know you got to educate them on, first of all, why they should go into a dispensary, and then what to purchase when they get in there, like how to make smart decisions, how to, buy quality products. And so, I think that, to me, that's one of the most exciting things about this, is just the opportunity to educate consumers and create a more sophisticated consumer market to match, where the industry is.
Yeah, I mean, one of the many things that this pandemic has ruined is sort of the cannabis buying experience, right? You walk into a dispensary now, you can't touch it, you can't smell it, you can't hold it, and a lot of times now I'm just ordering online and driving by and picking it up. I'm not even going inside. So I'm not even looking at it really. So what this can do, similar to kind of kind of how the judging is happening for the state fair, is by sort of coming up with a universal classification and grading scale for cannabis based on its chemical profile. What we're hoping is that some of these buying decisions can also take place in a similar manner. So now we can use the same system to sort of grade cannabis and to put it into buckets, like Jeff said. So you can even if you don't necessarily understand how it all works, you can say, I like this flavor profile, give me something just like this, and I want something that has a good amount of terpenes there, so I'm going to get a good full aroma, and that's something that someone doesn't have to take a look at the cannabis for, doesn't have to smell it or taste it. And so we're hoping that we'll get broader adoption with this. We're also hoping that other cannabis labs or researchers will also kind of build into this, and we can sort of get into a consensus on sort of a universal classification and grading system for cannabis. And I think that the applications are endless. And then sort of for the cannabis industry, throughout the supply chain, there's also a ton of applications. There's for a distributor, I'm also looking to plug holes. I ran out of this strain. It's very popular. I can't find any more of this strain. Well, what other strains with air quotes are out there that I can that are going to kind of fill that hole? Well, you can do that very easily by just looking at chemometric profiles and finding something that has a similar chemometric profile and slide it in there. And by chemometric profile, I mean just basically the terpene and the cannabinoid profile. So I
Well,
think there's a lot of applications.
so that is exactly how I want to shop, but there are not a ton of dispensaries that provide that information. There are not a lot of distributors who are including that information on the packaging. And so you don't have that opportunity to compare apples to apples, so to speak. Is that something that you think will start to be required, having a little bit more complex information on the packaging versus just saying what the total cannabinoid content is in that breakdown?
Well, I think product comp. I mean, giving people ingredients and product composition is incredibly important, right? I mean, it's just information is power, and it allows you to make those choices. Like you said, you can't make the choice of like to like or anything similar if you are not being given the information that you need to make that choice, right? So I think that's right. I would hope that as sort of regulations progress and the industry progresses, that information is um, more readily available if that information is included on the packaging. I think what's happening now, that in my opinion, really, is that I think as an industry we're struggling with how to articulate it. It's not that we don't see the value. It's not that that we work with a tremendous number of thoughtful, creative, innovative brands who are trying to provide a value proposition to the client in a way to be as transparent about what the experience that they're about to get. But the thing is, what language are we going to use? Kind of like you said, as soon as I begin to give you a list of 35 terpenes that are in it, you may have already fell asleep by the time I got that sentence out. So how do we translate that? I mean, we've attempted to engage the industry with certain tools. Like, for instance, we're using a phytofacts report, which is part of this, which is a chemometric report that not just lays out cannabinoids and terpenes in their ratios, which the ratios are incredibly important versus just the overall numbers, and then the organoleptic traits and the entourage effect, so that people can really get not just right. Information is important, but so is the framing, the context within which you deliver that information. It's hard, even that is difficult because it's a full page report when you're walking into a dispensary that may not be what you're getting. So we're trying to put a QR code ends up in the package, and maybe somebody can scan and dive a little further. Again, is provide as much information as people are willing to sort of engage with, I think, is an important first step. And as an industry, like I said, I think we're struggling with what's that language? What's that language we use to say, calm? Well, what does that mean? does that mean to you? And well, how am I supposed to take that? When you say it and you say it, it's totally different. And like Josh has been saying, until we get to a consensus, I think people are going to struggle both on the consumer side and on the brand side.
Well, and especially because it's all subjective to, who we are, what our, body composition is, when was the last time we ate, what all of these things matter. And it is challenging to educate people when, you know, cannabis is so nuanced and you have, really complicated words and you're talking about an endocannabinoid system and you hear somebody say terpenoids and then they say terpenes and it's like, wait, is a terpenoid and a terpene, are they different? Is this the same thing? Like, what is going on here? I'm so confused. Which, by the
If
way, terpenoid, terpene, are they just interchangeable or is there something
no,
different?
for the
Oh, thank
record,
you.
terpenoid is probably the proper term for all the terpenes found in cannabis. Terpenoids are a specialized kind of terpene, and all that the terpenoid designation means is they have different what are called functional groups, and it's like a structural thing with the molecules. And basically, essentially, all the botanical terpenes that we call terpenes are terpenoids, but terpene is sort of used as a catch-all phrase for the category. And then cannabinoids are specialized forms of terpenoids. So that's sort of the hierarchy, but everyone uses the term terpenes and you start throwing terpenoids in there. I just leave it off completely because it tends to confuse people. And I can do that easily enough already. So, um, but you're right. It's actually, we should all be saying terpenoids if we were being scientifically correct.
Okay, now and what about flavonoids?
And then flavonoids are a different type of terpenoids. And so they're all, just structurally slightly different than the family of chemicals called terpenoids. But yeah, the hierarchy would be terpene, terpenoid, flavonoid,
All right.
and
See,
cannabinoid.
yeah, and cannabinoids are forms of terpenoids. I
Yes.
didn't know that. I learned that today. That's exciting.
Well, happy to help. But yeah,
So
and just adding on to what Jeff said, it's kind of a fun story. So this year, I for the first time I got the kind of the honor to be able to judge the flower contest in the Emerald Cup, and also this year for the first time, I believe for the first time they actually separated the entries by dominant terpene. That was sort of they'd been running terpene tests, and the Emerald Cup has been kind of ahead of the curve for years on sort of being data driven, but this year they've been doing testing, like Jeff said, since 2010. It was our first gig, and they've committed to sort of, testing all along the way. But this last year, they sorted the actual entrance by dominant terpene. And, as someone who smoked cannabis his whole life and also tested cannabis for, 11, 12 years now, I still hadn't had the experience where I was able to select or to sample multiple different varieties of cannabis, but by their dominant terpene, and it really did. I mean, I don't know if it should be mandated, but if retail outlets and dispensaries wanted to be ahead of the curve, that's they would either only accept terpene tested strains, or they would test the strains by terpene and sort of group them, because it really it made it for a whole different experience where I could say, all right, I'm going to sit down and I'm only going to sample amongst the beta caryophyllene dominant varieties, and still there was so much variety just within that one category, but it was just a completely different way to consume cannabis. And it really was, for the first time, I felt like I was really kind of picking out the nuances from one variety to the next, because I was only sampling among sort of within a certain category, or like varieties, but that had slight nuances in the bouquet. And it was it was a lot of fun. And I just kind of, after that experience, I every time I kind of go into a dispensary or go on a dispensary's website and try and pick from all the strains. And I know cannabis, and I still don't know half the strains that are out there. And so I just find myself completely wishing that some enterprising retail outlet owner would catch on to this. And I think it wouldn't take long for the consumer to really get the hint. It's just not available really anywhere that I'm aware of.
So you saying that actually sounds the most like wine tasting of anything. So, you have your Merlots or the Pinotage or the Cab or whatever, and you can put 3 or 4 of those side by side and have this experience. So that totally makes sense to me. I would love to be able to go into a dispensary and be like, okay, here's your myrcene dominant area, here's the limonene, the beta caryophyllene. That's fun. And you can pick up on more nuance when you can have an experience where it's back to back to back, where you can start noticing those things, because I find that I can't pick up on those nuances as much if you're just walking through and smelling a bunch of random flower.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's either fuel or, citrus, but to pick up on those layers of aromas is harder to do, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. You can, it's like you don't really know what a cab can taste like until you line up 4 or 5 of them, like you said. And then also too, it's much easier to, okay, I have a much clearer picture of the difference between a cab and a Pinot when I drink them one after the other too. So you can also do it that way. But yeah, it really it completely changed my understanding and my palate for cannabis myself.
So, I see over here in the comments somebody asked, "Does SE Labs do ash tests?"
No, we don't. And yeah, we don't do that testing. It's not something we get requested a lot. I could see how it would have, potentially applied to cannabis, but I think how cannabis burns has a lot is not just indicative of the composition of that cannabis. It's how a joint's rolled or a bowl is smoked, and so how the cannabis is actually combusted plays a lot into sort of the composition of the ash. But no, it's not a test we've ever had requested.
And then, okay, the testing of aroma and density. So, with the California State Fair and this is scientific based. So, aroma, we're just looking scientifically at the terpenoids and right?
Yeah, so it's going to be a combination of things. It's going to be which cannabinoids are there, or excuse me, I keep using them interchangeably. Which cannabinoids and which terpenes are there in the sample, and that's how we will sort them into the different categories. And then beyond that, it'll be the overall concentration of the terpenes, both the dominant terpene as well as the total overall terpene content, which speaks to the magnitude of the flavor, aroma, and sort of the special effects that terpenes may or may not apply when you're consuming it. And and that sort of tracks with what we see people judging with human judging and organoleptic judging is when for instance judging an event like the Emerald Cup, when you go back and you crunch the numbers and you look at the data, if when the whole cup is judged blindly, and this goes back, this holds through kind of over the years, even when the test results were completely kept away from the judges till after the process. The top 15 samples, sort of versus the entire field, which is some years upwards of 700 different entries. When you take the top 15 versus the rest of the other 700 or so, you don't see any difference in the average THC percentage between the winners and all the also rans. But what you do see a huge difference in is the average concentration of the terpenes in the winners versus the terpenes in all the other entrants. So when you're judging an event like the Emerald Cup, the sort of the 2 or 3 entries that people are all like, oh wow, that's fire, that's fire. You go back and look at the test results, and they all have the highest concentrations of terpenes. Now, then, which one is more fire than the others becomes a subjective thing, based on kind of your own flavor preferences. But that's what people are instinctively drawn to is sort of a high concentration of terpenes. Like you said earlier, THC concentration when you're actually consuming the product and in your blind tasting it has nothing to do with whether you judge it to be quality or not, based
Yeah.
on the data.
Jeff, do you have something to add to that? You don't have to.
No, no, I think that was a great articulation of, it's a, I don't know, it's an infinitely complicated thing we're trying to explain. There are definitely, sort of, there are holes, and I think what's important to understand is where, this is a kind of a developing science, right? And so, at some point, the you asked about flavonoids or thiols or It'll all be part of the understanding of the composition of the cannabis you're taking, and who knows, maybe the form of cannabis based on whatever regulatory direction we're taking changes. Maybe it's who knows what form factor the government decides is safest or what have you. So I think it's a I think what we have now is a great introduction to organizing the sort of the chemovar universe, and
Well, and I think this is, it's fun to be it's the first time, and SC Labs, what an amazing thing that y'all get to be the ones that judge it. All these, people are submitting their samples to you. You may have a huge boost in your business, may if you keep all these people as clients.
And look, there's definitely the financial motivator, but I mean, honestly though, is a I'm a California kid. I grew up here. Like for me, and I grew up, we're it's actually laboratories, science of cannabis, but I grew up in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz has always been incredibly tolerant and liberal around cannabis, support for cannabis. I mean, not just you know enforcement or lack of enforcement or non-prioritization of cannabis, but the support for cannabis. So I've really unique opportunity to be exposed to cannabis and the cannabis industry since I was a teenager, but in a way where I'm not being hunted, basically, right? And that's exciting for me. That means to me the framing of the state fair. I've gone to the county fair, man, cows and it's amazing when you think about who is attending. We've been to the Emerald Cups, we've been to the Chalice Cups back in the day, and all the other, I've done the High Times Cups, and that crowd is there. You're preaching to the choir. You walk into the state fair and you're talking to people who have no concept. And so that to me is the biggest draw there. That's what's most exciting about this. I don't, who knows what the business implications are going to be, but the implications on changing people's minds, that's powerful. So the state fair is, their intention is to run this contest, but then to do something very similar in terms of, education and presentation for all the county fairs as well around the state.
And
That's that's
I
great.
hope the way they lay it out and deliver it, that is as just as important as the testing and actually having it here. I hope you don't have to be 21 years old to be able to, go in and just see it. Like, this is part of the California lifestyle. Like, it should be normalized. So hopefully this is just as easy to access at the state fair as it will be to get to the petting zoo or to get your fried butter and fried Snickers or whatever the hell.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I agree with that. I'd love to see that. This will be the first time I've gone to the state fair in 20 years.
Yeah. I've never been to the California State Fair, but now I'm motivated. Okay, so the submission window opened November 1st and it closes on March 30th. So when is the state fair?
The award celebration is July 15th to the 31st
Okay.
next year, right? So there's a decent amount of time. The winners promotion begins in June, so the results and winners will know sometime in May. And so there's kind of a right. It's a pretty long lead in. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
window's pretty. You're right. It's pretty long window.
Right. So people can get motivated to get involved. And so what is that process? What do they do?
So basically, it's what's called a compliance sampling, right? So there's we're actually going to anybody can contact the lab. It's as easy as kind of clicking through the links that are directly on the front page of the website, and it's really kind of instructive and intuitive on how to enter your sample. But you're really entering through the lab for the state fair. The lab is responsible for the process of collecting and testing the sample. So right from the get go, and then that information is transmitted to the judges running the state fair, and they're according to the criteria and blah blah blah, right? So it's as easy as just contacting the lab or just getting on the website. Through the website, you can set up a sampling event, and then make sure that your entry is submitted. If you choose to, for clients that we have that are entering compliance samples anyway, I mean, they're able to select, right? It's data based.
Yeah.
Anything that they've had tested during that window, they can go back and make the choice later. So it might be one of those things where you want to make sure you want to see the test results before you enter it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that works too. So,
Right on.
that's an option.
All right, I dig it. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think's important to highlight around this state fair and scientific judging and all that good stuff?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's part of the conversation now. You talking about cannabis, hopefully you're kind of abandoning some old terms and you're really beginning to embrace 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now. My kids, I don't even know if I'm supposed to say when my kids smoke cannabis, but kids are kids and do what they do. When people the age of my children end up smoking cannabis, you know, the way based on sort of the things that we're engaged in, the way that they'll be relating to cannabis and their understanding of the product will be absolutely night and day different than us. And that's amazing when you think about how long we as human beings have had a relationship with cannabis, right? And just sort of how quickly that's evolved. Our knowledge is evolving. That's pretty exciting.
I agree. And, it's such an interesting time being, one of the kids from the war on drugs. And, you had to develop your relationship with cannabis secretly and then come out of the closet. And, you know, I look forward to people not having to do that shit. So cheers to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're living during a really exciting time, and yeah, it seems like the drug war is slowly kind of grinding to a halt. Next is the psychedelics. We can have that in the next time.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, are y'all gonna get into that testing world?
I think that's a ways off for us, but we definitely have a lot of people showing interest in it. And a lot of people are, there's a lot of excitement in certainly the mushrooms and some of the natural psychedelics that are kind of having a moment. So we'll see.
Yeah. Plant medicine is more than a moment. It's for
Yes, a
life.
lot of curiosity here within the organization to participate. We just don't know, we don't know the way forward, but the motivation's there for sure.
Right on. Well, thank y'all so much for hanging out, Josh and Jeff. And thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.
It's high time. We had a high time together. Yes, it's a high time. We had a high time together.